Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? The Pharisees asked Jesus, once again testing him. What did Moses command you? They said. Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her. But Jesus said to them, because of your hardness of heart, he wrote this commandment for you. Years ago in the New York Times, I read a story by Tova Mirvis, an Orthodox Jew. She wrote of her divorce experience. Her divorce came after 17 years of marriage to a fellow Orthodox Jew, a culture in which only the husband has the authority to send the wife from the house. She recalls, at our wedding, her husband-to-be sat in one room flanked by rabbis. I in another room, in a white wicker chair in full bridal array. After the betrothal documents were signed, he was danced to me by the men, approaching underneath their tented, outstretched arms. Before lowering the tow veil over my face, he checked, in the biblical tradition of Jacob, Rachel, and Leah, to ensure that he had the right girl. But there was no guarantee, as life moved forward, that we would remain the same as we were then. And the years had brought her to this place. The people who had shouted Mazel Tov at our wedding asked, what happened? They wanted to hear the black and white explanation, not about the myriad shades of experience that move people apart. To get divorced was to shatter the wishful belief that to be Orthodox was to shield yourself from the discontent and disappointment that invaded marriages in the outside world. But it was hard, impossible really, to explain what went wrong. As I stood before the rabbis, the divorce document was deemed correct and read aloud in Aramaic, dated the year 5772, from the creation of the world, in the city of Boston, by the ocean Atlantic. I, Tova Eliza, the daughter of David Moshe, was released from the house of my husband to have authority over myself. As instructed, I cupped my hands. The room was silent. The elderly white-bearded rabbi who had been appointed my husband's emissary didn't say a word. With a sharp, deliberate movement, he dropped the folded paper into my hands. As the ritual required, I clasped the document with exaggerated motions and then turned and ceremoniously walked from the room. At the sound of the door closing behind me, the divorce took effect. So did something new inside me. One separation made way for another. The divorce, I realized, was from more than my husband. It was also a break with a way of life in which I did not sufficiently believe. When I was summoned back inside, I was apprised of my new status in Jewish law as a divorcee. I was told I couldn't be alone in a room with my former husband. I couldn't drive alone in a car with him between cities or live in the same apartment building. I couldn't remarry for 90 days. I couldn't marry a man of the ancient priestly caste. Before I left, the head of the rabbinical court looked me in the eye. I met his gaze, steeling myself for judgment and rebuke. Instead, he told me a story. The temple altar, the Talmud says, weeps when a man divorces his wife. When a revered rabbi got divorced, his students came to him and asked, how can this be? Does our tradition not teach that the altar weeps over a divorce? The rabbi looked at his students. Better the altar should weep than should I. All these rigid rules, all these unyielding laws, yet here too was the recognition of human pain. Here too was acceptance of human experience. It was this wisdom from my tradition that I wanted to hold on to, even as I left so much behind. It is a new beginning, the rabbi told me, kindly. Don't look back. Go forth. Become the person you need to be. I smiled, nodded. Before I left, as they did at the end of my wedding, as they did at the conclusion of divorce ceremonies hundreds of years ago, the rabbis wished me Mazel Tov. And that's the end of her story. As explained on Chabad, a Jewish website, Mazel Tov is more than congratulations or good luck. Mazel is the term used in Jewish mysticism to describe the root of the soul. The mystics say that only a ray of our soul actually inhabits our body. The main part of the soul, our mazel, remains above, shining down on us from a distance. When someone is told Mazel Tov, they are being given a blessing. May this drip of inspiration from your soul above not dissipate, but rather have positive and lasting effect. That from this event onwards, you should live your life with higher consciousness. You should be aware of the blessings in your life and be ready to receive more and more. Tovis Mervis' story sheds light on the ancient practice of divorce, where only men can write a certificate of dismissal and divorce their wife, putting her out of his house. Jesus' response points to divorce having been practiced for centuries, referring to Moses, that divorce was created due to the hardness of the human heart. If a woman failed to please her husband because he discovered some indecency in her, he could write her a bill of divorce. The intent of the original law of divorce was to provide a sense of mercy. Divorce was preferable to total abandonment. Marriage was intended to endure. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus makes no bones about it. In Genesis, humans joined together to become one. Yet often due to our frailty, we are unable to fully join together, or sometimes to maintain the unity of relationship. Perhaps we hold back some part of ourselves, or as we grow, more fully become the being we were created to be, and grow apart. In Tova Merva's story, there is mercy and grace, acknowledgement by the rabbis that her divorce is a new beginning, a blessing. As adults, trials and tribulations of life have created places of hardness in our hearts. Yet wisdom, compassion, mercy, and grace are desperately needed in our world. That light that stream, the mazel of our soul, is desperately needed. The strife we are encountering is overwhelming. Christians are persecuted. The marginalized flee oppressive governments before they too are killed. Many are sick and dying. It is situations just such as these that can harden our heart. How do we respond to such atrocities? Only each heart and God knows. At the end of the gospel reading today, people were bringing little children to Jesus in order that he might be touched, that he might touch them. And the disciples spoke sternly to them And indignant, Jesus says to them, "Let the little children come to me. Do not stop them. For it is to such as these that the kingdom of God belongs. Truly I tell you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God as a little child will never enter it." There is an innocent openness and acceptance to children that have not yet been wizened by the experience of the harshness, and wounds of life. They are open to approach others, to experience a healing embrace and receive the grace and mercy of it, and to give it back, to offer it freely, openly. Love requires constant tending of the heart, to keep the light of the soul flowing. Pray for those who harm or grieve you. Acknowledge your woundedness. Ask God to open your heart to release the things that hinder your light and love of God and neighbor. Pray for release from envy, hatred, sorrow, anger, disappointment, shame, guilt, or what you name for yourself. And embrace the light and love of your own soul, of God's gift and grace, of God's love for you. It is a constant tending to the garden of the heart, loosening the soil of the soul to receive wisdom, to be filled with mercy and grace, as we grow in love of God and neighbor, until a spirit of unity emerges in our struggling world, because God knows our world needs for us to be unified, to be loving, to be merciful and compassionate. Let your light grow. Let your love be kindled and drawn closer and closer to God as you grow closer and closer to your betrothed.